Part 1. The Language Beneath the Words. Picture this. You walk into a rooftop networking event in Singapore. The skyline glitters behind floor-to-ceiling glass. Around you, dozens of strangers dressed in sharp business casual are sipping cocktails, exchanging business cards, laughing a little too loudly. Nobody has said a single word to you yet, but you already know things. You can see the man near the bar, gripping his drink like a lifeline, white-knuckled, eyes scanning the room every few seconds. You notice the woman by the window whose smile stretches wide and bright every time someone speaks to her, yet whose eyes remain oddly still, like two glass beads behind her laughter. You spot the young consultant in the corner who hasn't moved from his spot in 20 minutes, not because he's antisocial, but because he's watching everything, absorbing the room like a sponge before he makes his move. None of these people have told you anything, yet you already understand something real about each of them. This is not magic. It is not a superpower you were either born with or denied. It is an art, a precise, learnable, deeply human art called reading people. This book exists to teach you that art. Understanding people at a glance is not about mind reading or guessing games. It is about intelligent observation, empathic interpretation, and the skill of responding to what is actually happening, not just what is being said. The human body, the human face, the way someone stands or walks or falls silent, all of it tells a story. Most of the time, people narrate that story without ever realizing it. They broadcast their inner world through the angle of their jaw, the tension in their shoulders, the speed of their blinking. If you learn to read this language, you can understand a person's feelings, thoughts, and intentions without them speaking a single word. And here is the most fascinating part. You already speak fragments of this language. You just haven't learned to be fluent. From the very first months of life, long before words become available to us, human beings communicate through images, gestures, posture, and expression. Think of a toddler who knocks over a glass of juice. Her mother scolds her, but smiles at the same time. What does the child remember? The smile, not the words, not the tone, the face, because our brains are wired, deeply and evolutionarily, to prioritize visual information over verbal. That instinct never leaves us. When we grow into adults, we carry it with us into every boardroom, every first date, every difficult conversation, every job interview. Most people never consciously develop this capacity. They look at others without truly seeing them. They hear words without listening to the music underneath. This book is your training in that deeper form of seeing. What you will learn here is not a parlor trick. It is not a technique for detecting liars at dinner parties or winning social situations through manipulation. What you are learning is a serious, empirically grounded, psychologically rich skill, one that will give you access to the inner lives of people around you, and in doing so, transform how you relate to them. You will learn to notice the slight tremor in someone's lower lip that signals they are suppressing tears. You will learn to distinguish between a genuine, full-face smile and the kind of practiced, performative smile that corporate trainers teach in customer service workshops. You will learn to read the micro-expression that flashes across a colleague's face when you present an idea they privately hate but publicly support. You will understand why a job candidate's feet betray her confidence even when her voice does not. These skills will serve you in business negotiations in Dubai, in difficult conversations with aging parents in Melbourne, in first dates in Paris, in team meetings in Chicago. They are universal because they are rooted in something universal, the biology of human emotion. The applications are vast. In job interviews, in sales conversations, in friendships, in romantic partnerships, in leadership, in coaching, in therapy. Everywhere human beings encounter one another, the silent language of the body is being spoken. Fluency in this language gives you a profound advantage, not the advantage of the manipulator, but the advantage of the deeply understood and deeply understanding person. There is a crucial distinction here that we will return to again and again throughout this book. Understanding is not the same as judging. Judging comes from ego. Understanding comes from empathy and attention. When you see someone standing with closed posture, arms folded, shoulders turned inward, head slightly down, it is easy to label them as cold, unfriendly, or arrogant. That is judgment. That is taking a single piece of data and stamping a verdict on an entire human being. But understanding goes further. It asks, what is happening underneath this posture? Perhaps this person is walking into a room full of strangers for the first time since a devastating loss. Perhaps their culture taught them that open, expansive posture is rude. Perhaps they are simply exhausted. Perhaps they were hurt in this very building 2 years ago, and their nervous system still remembers. This level of perception, the kind that holds multiple possibilities simultaneously, that resists the seduction of quick conclusions, is what separates truly skilled observers from people who merely think they can read others. This field of study is older than psychology itself. For thousands of years, human beings have understood intuitively that the body is a mirror of the mind. Ancient Chinese physicians studied the color and tension of the face not only to diagnose illness, but to understand the emotional and energetic state of the patient. Aristotle wrote extensively on the relationship between physical characteristics and personality, what we now call physiognomy, a field that has been both celebrated and deeply misused across history. In Renaissance Europe, portrait painters were trained not only in technical skill, but in the observation of human character. How a slight tension around the jaw reveals pride. How the way a man holds his hands while posing tells you something about his relationship to power. The 20th century brought scientific rigor to these intuitive traditions. Researchers began systematically studying the connection between physical expression and psychological state. They filmed people in moments of genuine and performed emotion. They cataloged facial movements. They tracked eye behavior. They measured posture changes under stress. And they discovered something remarkable. Beneath all the cultural variation in how people express themselves, there are universal patterns, hardwired, cross-cultural signals that human beings share simply by virtue of being human. Dr. Paul Ekman's decades of research at the University of California gave us the concept of micro-expressions, involuntary, nearly imperceptible flashes of genuine emotion that appear on the face for fractions of a second before social conditioning reasserts control. Ekman and his colleagues demonstrated that the 7 basic emotions, happiness, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, contempt, and surprise, produce identical facial configurations in people from vastly different cultures. They appear on the faces of isolated tribal communities in Papua New Guinea the same way they appear on the faces of Manhattan executives. They are not learned, they are inherited. This discovery changed everything. It meant that a well-trained observer could, in theory, read the emotional truth of any human being, regardless of language, culture, or social performance. Today, the science has advanced still further. Neuroscience has given us insight into the brain mechanisms underlying emotional expression. Behavioral psychologists have mapped the relationship between chronic body posture and long-term psychological states. Social researchers have documented how people signal status, submission, dominance, attraction, and deception through unconscious physical behaviors. We now have both scientific precision and practical methodology. Learning to read people transforms every area of your life, Not because it gives you power over others, but because it gives you genuine understanding. Consider what changes when you can look at your manager in a Monday morning meeting and know, really know, whether she is genuinely energized by the project or simply performing enthusiasm to hit her quarterly targets. When you understand that your oldest friend's reassurance of everything is fine carries a weight of suppressed grief in the slight tension around his eyes. When you can walk into a sales negotiation and see, in the tightening of the client's jaw at your first pricing slide, that you need to change your approach before you lose the room, you stop guessing, you start understanding. This is not a claim to omniscience. Reading people does not give you telepathy. What it gives you is the capacity to interpret the unconscious signals that human beings broadcast constantly, involuntarily, honestly. These signals are, in a very real sense, more truthful than speech, because they arise before the editing machinery of self-presentation kicks in. The face reacts before the mouth opens. The body responds before the mind decides what to say. When you learn to receive these signals, you gain access to a richer, truer version of the people around you. There is another gift buried in this practice that many people do not anticipate. It turns the lens back on you. As you develop the habit of watching others carefully, you begin to notice your own patterns. The way your shoulders creep toward your ears when your boss enters the room. The way your speech quickens when you are not telling the full truth. The way you turn your feet toward the exit when a conversation becomes unbearable. Seeing these patterns in others first makes you ready to recognize them in yourself. This self-awareness is not a side effect of reading people. It is, arguably, the most valuable outcome. A quick note on the ethics of this work, because they matter enormously. Everything in this book can be used to understand or to exploit. The same knowledge that helps a compassionate therapist connect with a grieving client can, in theory, help a predatory salesperson close a deal with someone who doesn't need the product. The same skills that help a loving parent recognize their teenager's hidden distress can help a con artist identify and target a vulnerable mark. We will not pretend this duality does not exist, but we will also not pretend that the answer is ignorance. The world is full of people who are already reading, consciously or not, the people around them. What we can control is whether we are reading with intention and ethics or simply absorbing these skills unconsciously and deploying them without reflection. Throughout this book, the ethical North Star is this: the purpose of understanding people is to meet them better, to communicate more cleanly, to reduce harm, to build trust, to give people the experience of being genuinely seen, which is, research consistently shows, one of the deepest human needs. When someone feels truly understood, something extraordinary happens. Walls come down, defenses dissolve, authentic connection becomes possible, and authentic connection, not performance, not strategy, not manipulation, is what this book is ultimately about. Let us begin. The first and most fundamental step in reading people is also the simplest and the most commonly skipped: learning to actually look. Most of us look at people constantly. We spend hours every day in the presence of others. We observe faces, movements, postures, expressions, but we filter almost all of it immediately, unconsciously, through the narrow lens of our own assumptions and preoccupations. We see what we expect to see. We dismiss what doesn't fit our existing narrative. We glance and conclude and move on, never slowing down enough to notice the tiny, fleeting, extraordinarily revealing signals that flicker across a person's face in the space between one breath and the next. Real observation, the kind that actually illuminates, requires something different. It requires what psychologists call open monitoring. a state of receptive, non-judgmental attention in which you take in everything without immediately categorizing it. You notice the slight darkening of someone's complexion when a particular subject is raised. You notice the momentary pause before they answer. You notice that their laughter comes a half-second too late, like a dubbed film with the audio slightly out of sync. These are not large signals. They are small, they are subtle, and they are honest. Great observers throughout history, great doctors, great diplomats, great negotiators, great writers, have all shared this quality, an almost fierce patience with the details. Sherlock Holmes was not invented as a fantasy. He was Arthur Conan Doyle's portrait of an idealized observer, a person who had trained himself to receive the full signal, not the abbreviated version that most people allow through. You can train yourself in exactly this way, not overnight, not in a weekend workshop, but through consistent practice, growing awareness, and genuine curiosity about the people around you. In the chapters that follow, we will build this capacity systematically. We will start with the face, the most expressive, most revealing, and most carefully managed part of the human body. We will move into the eyes, the window of the soul, as the poets say, and as neuroscience confirms in its own language. We will explore the body, posture, gesture, gait, the extraordinary honesty of the feet. We will study voice, not the words people say, but the music underneath the words, the tempo and pitch and rhythm that carries emotional truth the way a river carries water. And we will bring all of this together into a unified framework for reading people in real-world situations, in professional settings, in personal relationships, in moments of conflict, in moments of deep connection. By the end, you will see the world differently. You will sit in a cafe in Berlin and watch two strangers across the room and know within minutes whether their relationship is strengthening or fracturing. You will sit across a negotiating table in Seoul and see, in the micro-expressions of the person facing you, whether your proposal has landed or whether you need to pivot. You will sit across from a friend in a kitchen in Toronto and hear, beneath her cheerful, "I'm fine," the quiet, unmistakable signal of someone who is not fine and who needs you to ask again. These are not small skills. They are life skills. They are the skills of the fully present human being. Welcome to the beginning. The 5 dimensions of human character, reading personality through behavior. Before we can read individuals in real time, we need a map. Not a rigid system of categories and boxes. Human beings are far too complex and fluid for that. But a set of orienting frameworks that help us notice patterns, anticipate tendencies, and understand what we are looking at. Over centuries of observation and decades of formal psychological research, certain recurring configurations of personality have been identified. These are not types in the reductive sense. Most people carry elements of several, but they are tendencies, stable patterns of behavior, preference, and response that show up reliably across different situations and relationships. Understanding these tendencies serves a specific purpose. It gives you a baseline from which to read deviations. When you know that a person generally tends toward careful, measured communication, and then you see them speaking fast and loose, you know something has shifted. And that shift is information. Let's explore 5 broad personality orientations that research and observation have repeatedly surfaced. The first orientation belongs to people who are fundamentally organized around comfort, harmony, and belonging. You will recognize these people immediately in social settings. They tend to radiate a kind of soft, approachable warmth. Their posture is open, but not dominant. Their eye contact is warm and inviting without being intense. Their gestures tend to be slow and rounded. They laugh easily, genuinely, and contagiously. Think of the kind of colleague who always remembers your coffee order, who smooths tensions in team meetings before they escalate, who sends the group chat a funny meme when the energy goes flat. These people are the social glue of most organizations and most families. They create conditions in which others feel safe. But watch more carefully, and you will notice something else. These same people often struggle with direct conflict. When the conversation turns tense, their body language does something subtle, a slight pulling back, a softening of the jaw, eyes that skirt toward the exit. They do not want battle. They want resolution, even if resolution means swallowing their own frustration. This is not weakness. It is a specific emotional architecture built around a profound need for security and relational peace. Understanding this about someone changes how you approach disagreement with them. Directness and bluntness, which might land fine with a different personality, can feel like aggression to these people. Gentleness and acknowledgement before challenge is the key. The second orientation is the action-driven personality. These are the people you notice in a room before they speak, because their body language speaks first. Shoulders back, spine straight, jaw forward, eyes direct. Their gestures tend to be large, economical, and purposeful. They do not fidget. They plant themselves. These are the people who, when a problem arises, immediately start solving it. Talk is useful to them only insofar as it leads to decisions. Abstract philosophical discussion bores them quickly. They want resolution. They want forward motion. In professional settings, these personalities are invaluable. They execute. They deliver. They get things done without needing 5 rounds of discussion. But they can also be impulsive, and their directness, which they experience as efficiency, can feel bruising to more sensitive collaborators. If you are trying to communicate something important to an action-oriented person, the protocol is clear. Be direct, be brief, be solution-oriented. Don't circle, don't qualify endlessly. Say the thing. They will respect you for it. Hedge and soften, and they will lose patience before you reach your point. The third orientation is the expressive personality, people who live and communicate through emotion, color, and connection. In any room, these are the people with the most animated faces. Their expressions cycle fast and visibly: delight, concern, surprise, amusement, all moving across their face in fluid succession. Their hands and arms are almost continuously in motion when they speak, as though the words alone are insufficient and the whole body must be recruited. These people are often extraordinarily effective at building rapid rapport. They make you feel almost immediately that you matter to them, because their empathy is genuine and embodied. They are not performing interest. They feel it and they show it. But they are also emotionally volatile in ways that can be disorienting to less expressive personalities. Their enthusiasm can flip quickly into frustration. Their warmth can chill with equal speed when they feel dismissed or unheard. They are highly sensitive to tone and facial feedback. A slightly flat response from you can register as rejection, even when no rejection was intended. The key to connecting with expressive personalities is genuine reciprocity. They need to feel that their emotional intelligence is valued, not merely tolerated. Match their warmth. Give them the gift of being seen, and they will give you their full loyalty in return. The fourth orientation is perhaps the most frequently misunderstood: the observational, internally focused personality. In social settings, these people appear quiet, sometimes withdrawn, often described, inaccurately, as cold or unfriendly. What is actually happening is something quite different. These are people who experience the world most fully through internal processing rather than external expression. They are watching. They are thinking. They are cataloging. In a group, they may say very little, but if you Watch their eyes carefully. You will notice they are monitoring everything. They track the social dynamics of the room, who aligns with whom, who speaks over whom, who is performing confidence versus actually possessing it. They are running an internal analysis that is often more sophisticated than anything being spoken aloud. Their body language reflects their inward orientation. Slightly reduced personal space, a tendency to hold their arms close to their bodies, eye contact that is brief but precise rather than prolonged and warm. They are not being unfriendly, they are being focused. The mistake people make with these personalities is trying to rush them, demanding quick answers, filling silences, pressing for reactions. These behaviors trigger defensiveness and withdrawal. The right approach is patience, space, and demonstrated respect for their process. When they do finally speak, it is often worth waiting for. The fifth orientation is the analytical personality, people for whom the world is primarily a system to be understood, optimized, and refined. These are the people who need to know why before they agree to what. They approach decisions through logic, evidence, and structured reasoning. They are uncomfortable with ambiguity and energized by precision. Visually, analytical personalities tend to project an outer calm that can seem almost flat to more expressive types. Their gestures are minimal and controlled. Their facial expressions are reserved. Their speech is carefully chosen. They would rather pause for 10 seconds and say the right thing than respond immediately and say something imprecise. These are the people who read every line of a contract, who run the numbers 3 times before the meeting, who build the spreadsheet no one asked for because the data deserved to be organized. They are extraordinarily reliable in high-stakes situations because their decisions are based on reason rather than mood. The challenge arises in relationship, where logic alone is an insufficient currency. Emotional connection requires a different language than data. Analytical personalities often struggle in this gap. They are not cold, they simply express care through acts of precision and reliability rather than warmth and verbal affirmation. To build trust with an analytical person, you must earn it through demonstrated competence and consistency. Vague promises and enthusiastic reassurances will not land. Clear facts, documented follow-through, and patient evidence-based communication will. We have now sketched 5 broad orientations, but here is what matters most. No human being lives entirely in one category. We are all mixed compositions, combinations of these tendencies in different proportions, expressed differently depending on context, relationship history, stress level, time of day, and a dozen other variables. The map is not the territory. The categories are tools for seeing patterns, not cages for containing people. What the map gives you is this. When you recognize the dominant orientation of the person in front of you, you immediately have a working hypothesis about what they need from communication, what stresses them, what earns their trust, and what puts them on the defensive. You can test this hypothesis against what you observe. You can revise it as new data comes in. And you can respond with far more precision than if you were simply operating on gut feeling alone. This is the foundation. In the chapters that follow, we will place this framework under a microscope, examining the face, the eyes, the body, the voice, and show you how to observe, interpret, and respond with the skill of a true student of human nature. Part 2. The Face, Humanity's Most Honest Canvas. There is a moment in every significant conversation when the face tells the truth before the mouth has decided whether to. It lasts perhaps 1/3 of a second, sometimes less. A flicker of tightness around the eyes, a momentary compression of the lips, a barely perceptible widening of the nostrils. Then the social mask reassembles itself. The polite expression returns, the composed voice resumes, and the moment is gone. But something real happened in that fraction of a second. And if you were watching carefully, you saw it. This is the territory we are entering now, the human face, the most complex, most expressive, and most carefully managed surface of the human body. To read it well is to access a dimension of human truth that most people never reach. The architecture of the face. The human face contains 43 distinct muscles. Most animals have far fewer. This extraordinary musculature evolved, researchers believe, precisely to serve communication, to allow human beings to signal their internal states to one another with a precision and nuance that no other species can match. These muscles are divided into two categories based on the control we have over them. Some are voluntary. We can move them deliberately when we choose to smile, frown, raise an eyebrow, or widen our eyes. Others are involuntary. They respond to emotional stimuli automatically, below the level of conscious intention, faster than the thinking brain can intervene. This involuntary category is where the gold is. When a genuine emotion arises, real fear, real joy, real contempt, the involuntary muscles fire before the social brain can manage the performance. For a fraction of a second, the face shows exactly what is happening inside the person. Then awareness catches up, the voluntary muscles reassert control, and the managed expression returns. That fraction of a second is called a micro-expression. Dr. Paul Ekman, whose pioneering work at UCSF and later the Paul Ekman Group spans more than 5 decades, identified and cataloged these micro-expressions with meticulous precision. He trained himself, and later trained others, to recognize them in real time. His work demonstrated something extraordinary. The 7 primary emotions produce identical facial configurations in human beings across every culture on Earth. To be precise about this, a researcher showing photographs of fearful expressions to isolated villagers in the highlands of Papua New Guinea received the same identifications as researchers showing the same photographs to university students in Tokyo, Amsterdam, and Nairobi. The configurations are universal. They are in our DNA, not our culture. This universality is what makes micro-expressions so powerful as a reading tool. They cannot be faked consistently. They cannot be suppressed reliably. And once you learn to recognize them, they become a direct window into the emotional reality of the person in front of you, regardless of what words they are using to describe that reality. The 7 universal expressions. Let us examine the 7 primary micro-expressions and what they look like in practice. Happiness, when genuine, involves the coordinated activation of 2 muscle groups. The zygomaticus major, which pulls the corners of the mouth upward and outward, and the orbicularis oculi, which creates the characteristic crinkling around the outer corners of the eyes. The French physician Guillaume Duchenne identified this second component in the 19th century, which is why genuine smiles are still called Duchenne smiles in the scientific literature. The critical diagnostic detail, the orbicularis oculi, cannot be reliably activated voluntarily. When people attempt to fake a smile, performing happiness they do not feel, they typically activate the mouth muscles successfully but fail to engage the eye muscles fully. The result is what skilled observers describe as a dead-eye smile. The mouth curves correctly, but the eyes remain flat, still uninvolved. If you have ever found yourself unsettled by a smile without quite knowing why, this is almost certainly what you were detecting. Sadness, in its micro-expression form, produces a specific triangulation of the inner corners of the eyebrows. They draw upward and together in a characteristic shape that is extraordinarily difficult to fake voluntarily. This movement, combined with a slight downward pull at the corners of the mouth, forms the universal expression of grief. Most people attempting to perform sadness fail to produce the inner corner eyebrow movement and instead produce an expression that reads as discomfort rather than sorrow. Anger generates one of the most easily recognizable configurations. The brow pulls down and inward, creating a vertical furrow between the eyebrows. The eyelids tighten, the jaw clenches, the nostrils may flare, the lips press together or thin dramatically. The overall effect is one of intensified, focused energy directed outward. Even a fraction of a second flash of this expression, a micro-expression, communicates threat and displeasure with unmistakable clarity. Fear produces rapid, wide activation. The eyebrows rise and draw together, the upper eyelids pull up sharply, the lower eyelids tense, and the mouth opens slightly with the lips drawn back horizontally. Breathing accelerates. The body is preparing to respond to threat. In micro-expression form, this configuration appears and disappears in less than half a second, but it registers on the observer's subconscious even when the conscious mind doesn't catch it. Disgust involves the upper lip and nose in a characteristic wrinkle, the nose bridge crinkles, the upper lip raises, and the corners of the mouth pull downward and to the side. This expression evolved as a response to contaminated food, but the same configuration now appears in response to morally or aesthetically offensive stimuli. When a senior executive in a London boardroom flickers a micro-expression of disgust in response to a proposed strategy, he is communicating something his polished professional language will never quite capture. Contempt is uniquely asymmetric among the 7 primary expressions. It appears on only one side of the face, producing a one-sided lip raise or smirk that communicates a sense of superiority or moral disdain toward another person or idea. It is the most socially dangerous micro-expression to receive from someone and one of the most reliable predictors of relationship deterioration when it appears frequently between partners. Surprise is the most transient of the 7. The eyebrows shoot upward, the eyelids widen fully, and the mouth drops open. Because surprise is so brief, genuine surprise lasts only a second or two before resolving into another emotion, and because it is often deliberately performed, the key diagnostic is whether the surprise expression is followed by the emotion it logically precedes. Real surprise at good news should transition into real happiness. Performed surprise tends to resolve into a kind of neutral blankness. Reading the smile. A masterclass in subtlety. Of all the facial expressions, the smile is the one most subject to deliberate management, and therefore the one that most rewards careful analysis. We smile for dozens of reasons. We smile because we are genuinely happy. We smile because we are trying to appear non-threatening. We smile because social convention demands it. We smile to hide discomfort. We smile to mask contempt. We smile when we are exhausted and have nothing left but the performance of composure. Each of these smiles looks slightly different, and the differences are readable. The Duchenne smile, the genuine happiness smile, is characterized by the full activation of both the mouth and the eye muscles. In practice, this means the cheeks rise visibly, the nasolabial folds deepen, and the outer corners of the eyes show fine wrinkles, sometimes called crow's feet. The entire face is involved. The expression has a quality of completeness. The social smile, the kind deployed at professional events, in customer service, in situations of obligatory pleasantness, typically shows correct mouth mechanics but flat eyes. The cheeks may not rise as fully. There is a quality of two-dimensionality to it, as though the expression is printed on the surface rather than emanating from within. The contemptuous smile, or smirk, is asymmetric. One corner of the mouth rises, while the other remains flat or drops. The eyes may narrow slightly, This expression communicates amusement mixed with dismissal. It appears frequently in high-status individuals who are listening to arguments they consider beneath their level. The fearful smile, often called the fear smile in behavioral research, is perhaps the most interesting. It appears in situations of high social tension where the person needs to maintain connection while experiencing threat. The mouth mechanism is correct, but the eyebrows are slightly elevated and drawn together in the fear pattern, creating an expression that communicates both warmth and apprehension simultaneously. You will see this smile on the face of someone who is being criticized by a powerful person and attempting to smooth the situation through apparent good humor. Learning to distinguish these variants takes time and practice, but once your eye has been trained to notice the difference between full face and flat eye smiling, you will never look at a corporate event photograph the same way again. The geography of the lower face. Below the eyes, the lower face, the nose, the mouth, the jaw, and the chin, carries its own rich vocabulary of emotional signal. The lips deserve particular attention. When lips press firmly together, a tight horizontal compression with the muscles around the mouth. Engaged. This typically indicates suppressed speech, something the person wants to say but has decided not to. You will see this expression at the moment when someone is choosing to hold back an objection, a protest, or an emotional response. The stronger the compression, the more intense the suppressed reaction. When the lower lip is slightly bitten or pulled inward, this typically indicates anxiety, uncertainty, or self-restraint. In business contexts, it often appears at moments of decision-making under pressure. The person is literally containing their response while they process. Lip asymmetry, when one side of the mouth moves differently from the other, carries social meaning beyond contempt. A slight upturn on one side with a downward pull on the other can signal skepticism or ironic distance. The person is processing your words with a degree of internal commentary. The jaw muscles, the masseters, are powerful involuntary stress indicators. Under emotional pressure, people frequently clench their jaw without realizing it. In profile, you can sometimes see the masseters visibly flex and release. Straight on, a slightly protruding lower jaw often signals either defensiveness or aggression. The chin jut that appears when someone is bracing for confrontation or preparing to push back. A relaxed jaw, combined with relaxed muscles throughout the face, is one of the strongest indicators of genuine comfort. When someone feels genuinely safe and at ease, the entire musculature of the face tends to soften. The brows are level and slightly separated. The lips rest apart. The jaw hangs open a fraction. This is the face in its least performed state. And reading the contrast between this baseline face and the face under social pressure tells you an enormous amount. The eyes within the face. The eyes deserve their own full chapter, and they will get one. But it is worth noting here, in the context of facial reading, that the area around the eyes is the single most information-dense region of the face. The orbicularis oculi, the ring of muscle around each eye, is divided into an inner and outer segment. As we have noted, the outer segment, responsible for the eye crinkle of genuine happiness, is largely involuntary. But the inner segment, which controls the specific shape and tension of the eyelids, is also richly communicative. When the upper eyelid drops slightly, a partial closure called a hooded look, this can signal either dominance, the person is not alarmed or impressed enough to fully widen their eyes, or fatigue. The distinction is typically visible in the rest of the face. Dominance tends to be accompanied by a level or slightly raised chin and a still, controlled body. Fatigue tends to be accompanied by softer overall muscle tone and slower movement. When both eyelids tighten simultaneously in the center, a squinting motion without full closure, this typically indicates either skepticism, scrutiny, or cognitive effort. The brain is working hard on something, and the concentration manifests in the eyes. This expression appears frequently on the faces of people who are hearing something they are trying to evaluate carefully. The widening of both eyes, full upper eyelid elevation, signals alert attention, surprise, or high arousal. In the context of pleasant conversation, eye widening at a moment of disclosure typically indicates genuine interest. In the context of threat or confrontation, the same movement signals the activation of the threat response system. Applying facial reading in the real world. A few years ago, a consultant named Margit was presenting a strategic proposal to a board of directors in Frankfurt. The proposal was 3 months in the making. It was comprehensive, well documented, and, she believed, genuinely strong. She was 20 minutes into her presentation when she noticed something. One of the board members, a silver-haired man in his 60s named Herr Brandt, had been nodding along with what appeared to be engagement. But in the moment when Margit laid out the financial projections for year 3, something flickered across Brandt's face. It lasted perhaps half a second. A slight raising and drawing together of the inner eyebrows, a momentary compression of the lips, the classic micro-expression of concern, or perhaps suppressed skepticism. Margit had trained herself to notice these signals. She paused. She did not steam ahead into year 4 projections. Instead, she looked directly at Herr Brandt and said, "These projections depend on a few assumptions I'd like to make explicit. I want to make sure we're aligned on those before we continue." What followed was a 40-minute discussion that significantly revised and ultimately strengthened the proposal. After the meeting, Brandt told her privately that he had been about to dismiss the entire strategy based on what he saw as an unrealistic assumption, buried in year 3, and that her instinct to stop and address it directly had saved the presentation. She had read a half-second expression on a face across a boardroom table, and it had changed the outcome of 3 months of work. This is what facial literacy looks like in practice, not as a party trick, as a genuine professional tool. A word on context and culture. One of the most common errors in facial reading is the decontextualized interpretation, treating a single expression as a self-contained data point rather than a moment within a larger stream. Facial expressions, like all behavioral signals, derive their meaning from context. A flash of fear micro-expression in the middle of a happy social gathering is more significant than the same expression during a meeting about upcoming layoffs. A contempt flash directed at a colleague's suggestion in a brainstorming session means something different from the same expression directed at you personally. Cultural context also shapes the display rules, the unwritten social norms governing which emotions may be expressed openly, which must be suppressed, and which must be performed even when unfelt. In many East Asian professional cultures, for example, the display rules around emotional expression in formal settings are considerably more restrictive than in many Western contexts. This does not mean people in these cultures feel less. It means the signal-to-performance ratio is different. A skilled reader learns to calibrate for context. The deeper principle is this: never read a single expression in isolation. Read the sequence. Read the trajectory. Read the expression in relation to the words being spoken, the relationship dynamics in the room, the history of the interaction, and the specific stimulus that preceded the expression. A micro-flash of disgust tells you something, but what it tells you depends entirely on when it appeared, in response to what, in what context, from whom. The face. As a pathway to self-understanding. One dimension of facial reading that surprises many people when they begin this practice. It turns the lens inward. As you develop sensitivity to the expressions of others, you inevitably begin to notice your own face with greater clarity. You catch yourself manufacturing the composed expression while your jaw tightens underneath. You notice the moment your eyes flatten in a conversation, even as your mouth continues to perform interest. You observe the asymmetric smile that appears when you are agreeing to something you are not sure about. This self-observation is not an indulgence, it is information about your own emotional state, your own needs, your own internal contradictions, and as with all information, what you do with it matters. Some people, when they discover that their face is betraying things they would rather not broadcast, immediately focus on controlling the signal, training themselves to suppress the expression. This is understandable, but it misses the more valuable lesson. The expressions your face produces involuntarily are telling you something true about your emotional state. Rather than suppressing the signal, the wiser response is to listen to it, to use it as data about what you actually feel, what you actually need, what is actually happening for you in this situation. The face is not just a transmitter to others. It is also a feedback channel to yourself. Understanding this, using self-observation as a pathway to emotional intelligence rather than merely as a tool for performance management, is one of the subtler gifts of this entire practice. Part 3. The Eyes, Windows to the Unconscious Mind. In the spring of 2019, a behavioral researcher named Dr. Yuna Park was conducting a study at a university in Seoul. She was examining how well-trained observers could detect deception during high-stakes conversations, specifically in negotiation scenarios where one party had a significant financial incentive to mislead the other. What she found confirmed something researchers had been documenting for decades. The eyes were the single most reliable betrayal channel in the entire body. Not the hands, not the posture, not even the face in its entirety. The eyes, and more specifically, the involuntary movements and changes around the eyes, consistently provided the most accurate signal of what the person in front of you was actually experiencing versus what they were performing. In one particularly striking case from her study, a subject, a mid-level financial analyst, maintained perfect vocal composure and deliberately relaxed body language throughout a negotiation in which he was fabricating his company's capacity to deliver. His hands were still, his voice was even, his facial expression was one of practiced confidence, but his pupils, unbeknownst to him, were giving a completely different account. They dilated sharply each time he stated a figure he had invented. They contracted when the interviewer pushed back with a counterpoint that threatened to expose his fabrication. And his blink rate, normally a comfortable 15 to 20 blinks per minute, spiked to nearly 40 during the moments of highest fabrication. None of the observers in the room consciously registered any of this. But when Park slowed the interview footage to frame-by-frame analysis, the ocular record told the complete story in perfect sequence. The eyes speak a language the conscious mind cannot fully censor. This chapter teaches you to listen to it. The physiology of gaze. To understand why the eyes are such powerful signal generators, it helps to understand what they actually are in biological terms. The eye is not simply an optical instrument. It is a direct extension of the brain. The retina is technically neural tissue, part of the central nervous system itself. The muscles that control eye movement are some of the fastest in the body and among the most directly connected to the brain's emotional processing centers, including the amygdala, the insula, and the anterior cingulate cortex. When something emotionally significant happens, a threat, a reward, a recognition, a shock, the emotional brain responds in milliseconds and the eyes respond in tandem, before the cortex has had time to formulate a conscious response. This is why the eyes are such honest witnesses. The distance between what you feel and what your eyes show is smaller than the distance between what you feel and anything else you control. Pupil dilation is perhaps the clearest example. The pupil, the dark aperture at the center of the eye, expands and contracts in response to light levels, but it also responds, independently of light, to emotional arousal of any kind. Interest, fear, pleasure, surprise, attraction, all produce pupil dilation. Disgust, aversion, and cognitive overload tend to produce pupil constriction. This response is entirely autonomic. There is no voluntary control over it whatsoever. A skilled observer, paying attention to pupil diameter in a reasonably consistent lighting environment, can track the emotional response of another person to almost any stimulus in real time, without the other person being able to prevent it. Blink rate and what it tells you. The normal resting blink rate for an adult human being is somewhere between 12 and 20 blinks per minute, with significant individual variation. What matters diagnostically is not the absolute number, but the deviation from a person's individual baseline. Elevated blink rate, significantly more frequent blinking than a person's norm, is consistently associated with cognitive or emotional stress. The brain is working hard, managing competing demands, and the increased blink rate is a physiological byproduct of this elevated processing load. You will observe elevated blink rates in people who are lying under pressure, in people who are overwhelmed, and in people who are trying to manage an emotional response they don't want to display. Reduced blink rate, significantly less frequent blinking than normal, is associated with intense concentration, emotional engagement, or the deliberate suppression of emotional display. The person is intensely focused on something. Importantly, reduced blink rate also appears in situations of emotional freezing, when someone has received information that is too difficult to process immediately, and their system has temporarily suspended normal function while the processing catches up. There is a specific scenario worth noting here. When someone is telling a story or recounting an experience, and their blink rate drops dramatically. This often indicates that they are genuinely reliving the memory rather than constructing a narrative. Real memories, re-experienced emotionally, tend to produce this low blink quality of deep absorption. Constructed accounts, fabrications, tend to produce more variable blink rates, often higher than baseline, as the cognitive load of invention imposes its demands. Eye movement and cognitive processing. Beyond pupil size and blink rate, the direction of eye movement has long fascinated researchers. Neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, popularized a model in which eye movements in specific directions were linked to different cognitive processes, looking up to the left for visual memory, up to the right for visual imagination, and so forth. The scientific validity of these specific mappings has been debated and largely discredited in controlled studies. However, a broader and more robustly supported principle remains intact. Eye movements during conversation do reflect cognitive processing, and patterns of eye movement can provide genuine information about what a person is doing with their mind. When people actively recall something from memory, genuinely retrieving stored information, they tend to disengage visually from their immediate environment. They look away from the person they are talking to, often toward a middle distance point that holds no informational content. The eyes are, in a sense, going inward to retrieve. When people are constructing something new, building a narrative, imagining a scenario, formulating an answer, the eyes behave differently. They tend to move more rapidly and less systematically, as if scanning internal possibilities rather than retrieving a specific file. The diagnostic question is not whether someone is looking left or right. It is whether their eye movement pattern looks like retrieval or construction, and critically, whether the pattern they show in emotionally neutral contexts, answering easy, factual questions, is consistent with the pattern they show in high-stakes contexts. Significant inconsistency between the two is worth noting. Eye contact, the architecture of connection and power. The duration, frequency and quality of eye contact is one of the most powerful communication variables in human interaction, and one of the most culturally and contextually sensitive. In most Western professional contexts, sustained eye contact during conversation signals confidence, engagement, and trustworthiness. The research benchmark, often cited in communication training, is that maintaining eye contact for roughly 60 to 70% of a conversation is associated with optimal perceptions of attentiveness and credibility by the listener. Less than that, and you appear distracted or evasive. More than that, and you begin to feel intimidating or aggressive. But these averages carry enormous individual and cultural variation. In many East Asian cultural contexts, sustained direct eye contact with a senior person carries connotations of challenge or disrespect. In many Middle Eastern cultures, among same-gender pairs, eye contact intensity can be markedly higher than Western norms, without carrying the confrontational reading it might in, say, a London office. In some indigenous Australian cultures, direct eye contact with an elder or a stranger is considered deeply inappropriate, a violation of relational protocol. A skilled reader does not apply a single universal template. They observe what appears natural and comfortable for the specific person in the specific context, establish a baseline, and read deviations from that baseline. What is almost universally true across cultures, however, is this. In moments of high emotional significance, eye contact changes. People tend to either maintain unusually steady eye contact, holding the gaze in a way that communicates the importance of what is being said, or to break contact at the emotionally critical moment, looking away precisely when the stakes are highest. The latter pattern, the gaze break at the peak of significance, is one of the most reliable signals in the reader's repertoire. It appears when someone is disclosing something they find painful, when someone is asserting something they are not fully certain of, and when someone is describing an event they experienced as shameful or frightening. The eyes go somewhere else because the full weight of the moment is too much to sustain with an open, connected gaze. A tale of two boardrooms. In a corporate context, the power dynamics embedded in eye contact behavior become vivid and sometimes dramatic. Consider two scenarios from different ends of the same organization. In a quarterly review meeting at a financial services firm in Amsterdam, the regional director, a woman in her 50s with a reputation for incisive analysis and low tolerance for imprecision, presents her findings to the executive committee. As she speaks, she maintains an even, steady gaze that moves deliberately around the table, resting briefly on each face. She does not look down at her notes while speaking, though her notes are there. She delivers the figures from memory, making eye contact as she does. When she delivers a challenging finding, she looks directly at the person most likely to feel challenged by it. She does not look away when she says the difficult thing. The subtext of this behavior reads as, "I know what I am saying. I mean it. You cannot minimize it by not looking at me." 20 floors below, in the same building on the same day, a junior analyst presents his quarterly update to his direct manager. He begins with reasonable composure. But when the manager asks a pointed question about a figure that doesn't reconcile, a question that implies either incompetence or omission, something shifts in the analyst's eyes. They drop, not all the way to the floor, but to a spot on the table between them. They stay there for several seconds, then return to the manager's face. But the return is incomplete. The eye contact that reestablishes is lower, softer, more asking permission than asserting presence. In that shift, the whole conversation changed. The manager did not hear it in the words. She saw it in the eyes. She knew, before the analyst completed his explanation, that the answer she was being given was not the full truth. These two vignettes illustrate how eye contact behavior encodes not just confidence, but the relationship between what a person knows and what they are prepared to claim. Emotional synchrony and mirror neurons. One of the most profound findings in social neuroscience over the past 3 decades concerns what happens when two people make genuine, sustained eye contact. Researchers studying neural activity in face-to-face conversations have documented a phenomenon they call neural coupling, a measurable synchronization of brain activity between two people who are genuinely attending to one another. When you look into someone's eyes with full, open attention, and they look back with equivalent openness, something happens in both of your brains that goes beyond information exchange. This is related to mirror neuron activity, the firing of neural circuits that map another person's emotional state onto your own brain, allowing you to literally feel something of what they feel. This is the neurological substrate of empathy, and it appears to be significantly enhanced by sustained, genuine eye contact. In practical terms, this means that the quality of your eye contact is not merely an impression management variable. It is a direct influence on the depth of connection you are capable of experiencing with another person. When you give someone the full gift of your undivided visual attention, you are not performing attentiveness. You are actually becoming more attuned to them. Your nervous system is literally resonating with theirs. This is why people describe being really seen by someone as one of the most profound social experiences available. It is not metaphorical. Something real is happening in the eyes and brain simultaneously. Detecting concealment in the eyes, perhaps the most practically urgent application of eye-reading skills, and the one most people instinctively want to develop, is the detection of deception. A brief but important caution before we go further: there is no single reliable tells for lying. Research consistently shows that people who claim to be highly accurate at detecting deception based on eye behavior alone perform only marginally better than chance. The reason is that the behavioral signals associated with deception, elevated gaze aversion, increased blink rate, pupil dilation, are also associated with stress, social anxiety, grief, and cognitive overload. Since being questioned about something you are lying about produces stress, and so does being questioned about something deeply true, the behavioral overlap between lying and truthful but distressed is enormous. What skilled observers learn to read is not lying specifically, but inconsistency, mismatches between what the person is saying and what the rest of their behavioral signal is suggesting. Specifically, the eyes are most useful when you have established a clear baseline for the person in neutral conditions, and you are then watching for deviations from that baseline when specific topics are introduced. If someone's blink rate, pupil response, and gaze behavior are all consistent across most of your conversation, and then a specific topic produces a sharp and simultaneous change in all three, that is meaningful, not proof of deception, but a significant flag that the emotional relationship to that topic is different from the emotional relationship to other topics. Worth following up, worth noticing. Worth keeping in your cognitive awareness as you continue the conversation. Eye behavior in groups. The final dimension of eye reading we will address here is how to use gaze behavior to understand group dynamics. In any gathering of 3 or more people, the eyes reveal the social architecture of the group more quickly and accurately than almost any other signal. Watch who people look at when they make a point they consider important. This is the person whose approval they are seeking, consciously or not. A speaker who consistently looks toward one particular person after making a key statement is treating that person as the group's primary validator. This may mean they are the most respected person in the room. It may mean they are the person whose criticism the speaker most fears. Either way, their position in the room's social hierarchy is being broadcast through gaze alone. Watch what happens to eye contact patterns when a conflict emerges. As tensions rise, people tend to increase eye contact with their allies and decrease it, or avoid it entirely, with their opponents. Within minutes of a contentious topic being raised, the invisible lines of faction in the room become visible through the gaze pattern. Watch what happens when someone new speaks for the first time. Where do people's eyes go? If they turn toward the speaker with genuine curiosity, the speaker has social capital. Their contribution is anticipated as valuable. If eyes stay forward, drift sideways, or drop to phones and notepads, the social signal is unmistakable. This person has not yet earned listening to. None of this is cruel or deliberately unkind. It is simply the rapid, unconscious social accounting that human beings have always performed, and that the trained observer can now read in real time, using it not to exploit hierarchies, but to navigate them wisely, to notice who is being overlooked, and to calibrate their own contributions accordingly. A practice for developing eye literacy. The single most effective way to develop sensitivity to eye signals is also the simplest. Pay deliberate, disciplined attention to eyes in every conversation you have for the next 30 days. Not obsessively, not in a way that makes you socially awkward, but intentionally. When someone is speaking to you, let your attention rest primarily on their eyes rather than their mouth or their hands. Notice when their pupils change. Notice when their blink rate shifts. Notice when they look away and where they look when they do. Notice the quality of eye contact when they are speaking about something neutral versus something emotionally charged. Keep a mental or physical note of what you observe and what it corresponds to in the conversation. Build up a library of observations. Over time, patterns will emerge. First in individual people whose baselines you know, then in strangers, then in groups. The eyes are not a puzzle to be cracked in a single reading. They are an ongoing stream of information available to anyone willing to be still enough and present enough to receive it. Part 4. The body, the voice, and the whole human signal. In the spring of a recent year, a senior sales director named Raphael was preparing for what he knew would be the most important client meeting of his quarter. The client, the procurement head of a major logistics company in São Paulo, had been in preliminary discussions with Raphael's firm for 3 months. The deal was large. The competition was fierce, and Raphael had just learned from a mutual contact that his main rival had submitted a pricing proposal roughly 15% below his own. Raphael went into the meeting focused not on his slides, not on his pricing, not on his prepared objections to whatever objections the client might raise. He went in focused on one thing: reading the room. Within the first 7 minutes, before a single slide had been shown, he had gathered the following. The client, a compact, precise man named Enrique, had placed his hands flat on the table and was sitting with his spine straight and his chin level. His feet, Raphael could see under the glass table, were planted squarely on the floor. He was not leaning in. He was not leaning back. He was neutral, not hostile, but certainly not warm. The 2 colleagues Enrique had brought with him told a different story. One of them, a younger woman who was clearly the technical evaluator, had shifted her chair fractionally toward Raphael when he entered. Her arms were open on the table, her notepad in front of her, and she had uncapped her pen before anyone had said a word. She was prepared to be interested. The other colleague, an older man sitting slightly back from the table, had his arms crossed low across his abdomen, not high across the chest, which would signal defensiveness, but low, which typically signals a kind of protective caution. He was the budget keeper, Raphael suspected, the one who had seen the competitor's lower number and was holding it close. Before he said a word about his product, Raphael made 3 rapid adjustments. He directed his opening remarks primarily to the technical evaluator, knowing she was already engaged. He acknowledged the budget keeper directly and early, naming the economic context explicitly rather than waiting to be challenged on it, and he gave Henrique, the decision-maker, the experience of being the calm center of gravity in the room by keeping his own body language slightly more still and formal than he might otherwise have used. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Raphael won the contract at his original price point. "I never felt like I was reading them," he said afterward. "It felt more like I was listening to them. The whole room was talking. I just had to be quiet enough to hear it." This chapter is about learning to hear what the whole room and the whole body is saying. The body as a broadcast system. We have spoken at length about the face and the eyes because they are the sites of the most concentrated, most rapid, and most emotionally specific signaling in the human body. But the body as a whole is also continuously broadcasting in a lower frequency, more chronic, but equally honest register. Where the face shows what someone feels right now in this moment, the body shows something broader, how someone habitually holds themselves in relation to the world. Posture, gait, gesture, the way someone occupies space, these are the accumulated physical expression of a person's psychology. They change more slowly than facial expressions, but they are no less revealing. The fundamental principle is this: the body communicates what language manages. A person can choose careful words. They can modulate their tone. They can practice controlling their facial expressions. But the body's chronic patterns, the slight, permanent forward hunch of someone who has spent years trying not to be noticed, the wide, space-claiming stance of someone accustomed to authority, the restless, energy-diffusing gestures of someone whose nervous system is chronically aroused, these are not so easily managed. They have been written into posture and movement over years, and they reveal themselves in every room the person walks into. Posture, the autobiography of the spine. Stand in any public space, an airport departure hall, a busy coffee shop, a hotel lobby, and watch the people moving through it. Within seconds, you will notice that you are making judgments about them based almost entirely on how they carry their bodies. The person moving through the airport with their head up, shoulders back and down, taking long, confident strides, you register them as someone in command of their situation. Whether they are a business executive or a first-time solo traveler, the posture signals a basic relationship with the environment. I am not afraid of this space. The person moving hunched with their bag pulled in close, eyes down, taking smaller steps that seem to apologize for the space they are occupying. You register something different. Not weakness, necessarily. The hunched posture might belong to someone carrying an invisible weight, someone who was told repeatedly as a child to make themselves smaller, someone who is in physical pain. But the relationship with the environment that is being communicated is, I am not sure I belong here. These readings are not prejudgments. They are biological responses to behavioral signals that have been meaningful to human survival for hundreds of thousands of years. The brain processes posture information before conscious awareness catches up, which is why we have strong gut reactions to people before we have formed any explicit opinions about them. What this means for the skilled reader is twofold. First, Posture tells you a great deal about how a person relates to their current environment and social situation, information you can use to calibrate your approach. Second, your own posture is broadcasting information about you with the same automatic honesty. This awareness matters as much as the reading of others. The hands. Nothing is more revealing. If posture is the autobiography of the spine, the hands are the autobiography of the moment. Human hands evolved for two primary purposes: tool use and social communication. They are extraordinarily innervated. The density of nerve endings in the fingertips rivals any other part of the body, and they are deeply connected to the brain's emotional processing systems. When we feel something strongly, our hands respond. This is not metaphorical. The hands are among the first body parts to physically express an emotional state, often before the face or voice. Open palms facing upward or outward are among the most universally recognized signals of honesty, openness, and non-aggression. There is strong evolutionary logic for this. Showing the palms means showing that you carry no weapon. In conversation, open palm gestures communicate transparency and invitation. When a speaker addresses an audience with open, visible palms, listeners consistently rate them as more trustworthy and more convincing. Contrast this with hidden hands, hands tucked into pockets, held behind the back, slipped under thighs while sitting. Hidden hands tend to produce unease in observers, though most people cannot immediately explain why. The evolutionary logic again. Concealed hands were historically dangerous hands. In modern contexts, hidden hands typically signal social discomfort, self-protective withdrawal, or a desire to minimize one's social presence. The person is, in the most literal sense, removing themselves from the conversation by removing their most communicative body part from view. Begin with low-stakes observation. Public spaces are ideal laboratories: parks, airports, cafes, public transport. Choose a person or a pair or a group and watch them without judgment for a few minutes. Not to reach conclusions, not to produce verdicts about who they are or what they are experiencing, simply to notice. Notice the posture. Is it expansive or contracted? Is there muscular tension visible in the shoulders, the jaw, the hands? Does the body appear to be moving toward something or away from something? Notice the face. What is the resting expression when the person believes they are unobserved? How does it change when they interact with someone? Can you identify the emotional quality of the transitions? Notice the hands. Where are they? What are they doing? Are they working to communicate or working to hide? Notice the eyes. Where do they rest when the person is listening? Where do they go when the person is thinking? What happens in them when something significant is said? As you build these observations into a regular practice, your brain begins to do something remarkable. It starts processing these signals automatically, preconsciously, the way a fluent reader processes words without consciously decoding each letter. The pattern recognition accelerates. What once required effortful, deliberate attention becomes intuitive. This is not a metaphor for some mystical development. It is the normal neurological process by which any complex skill is internalized. The brain builds efficiency through repetition. Practice enough times, and reading people begins to feel less like analysis and more like perception. Reading habits and routines. Beyond the immediate behavioral signals we have studied, there is a broader category of human information, the patterns that people establish over time and reveal through their habitual behavior. These patterns are, in many ways, even more reliable than in-the-moment signals because they are less subject to situational variation. A micro-expression tells you what someone is feeling right now. A behavioral habit tells you who someone is, or more precisely, who they have been shaped by experience into being. Punctuality is one of the most commonly discussed examples, and for good reason. Whether someone reliably arrives on time or reliably does not is not merely a logistical fact. It is a statement about their relationship to commitments, to other people's time, and to their own organization. Consistent punctuality reflects a person who places real value on reliability and reciprocity. Consistent lateness can mean many things: anxiety about commitment, ambivalence about the relationship in question, a disorganized relationship with time itself, or even a subtle assertion of social status, arriving last being, in some cultures, a marker of importance. The meaning of the pattern requires context, but the pattern itself is real information. The state of someone's workspace is another of these deeper pattern signals. A highly ordered desk or office, every document in place, nothing extraneous, everything accessible, typically reflects a mind that finds comfort in structure and control. This may be a genuine organizational strength, or it may be a defense against the anxiety of uncertainty, often both. A thoroughly disordered workspace may reflect a creative, associative mind that finds its own logic in apparent chaos, or it may reflect a person who is currently overwhelmed. Again, context is everything, but the pattern is not random. Walking style is one of the most underrated behavioral signals. People walk the way they feel about being in the world. Long, even, grounded strides with a level head and open chest reflect a person at ease with their forward motion through life. Rapid, tense strides with a slightly forward-leaning posture and eyes focused close to the ground ahead suggest someone under pressure, perhaps running toward something or away from something. Small, hesitant steps with frequently downcast eyes are the gait of someone who has learned to take up less space. And there is almost always a story behind that learning. These are not judgments, they are questions. When you observe a pattern in someone's behavior, the appropriate response is curiosity, not verdict. Behavior under stress. The deepest reveal, if you want to know who someone really is, past the cultivated professional presentation, the social persona, the carefully managed impression. Watch them when something goes wrong. Stress is the great revealer of character because it compresses the distance between who we have trained ourselves to appear and who we actually are. The psychological resources we use to manage our presentation, self-awareness, impulse control, strategic communication, are precisely the resources that become depleted under pressure. As the pressure rises, the gap closes, and what remains is something closer to the essential person. Some people, under stress, become more themselves in an admirable way, sharper, warmer, more honest, more direct. The pressure strips away the performance and reveals a person whose core is solid. These are the people you want beside you when things get genuinely difficult. Others reveal something different under pressure. A rigidity that was always present but usually managed, a tendency toward blame that polished communication normally conceals, a fragility that everyday confidence obscured. This is not a condemnation. It is information. Information that helps you understand what a person needs, what support looks like for them, and how to engage with them in a way that builds rather than breaks. Watch, specifically, for these behavioral shifts under stress. Does the person's speech accelerate to the point of losing precision? Does it slow to an almost deliberate artificiality, as though each word is being carefully guarded? Does the body close? Arms crossing, chin dropping, legs drawing together? Does it expand in the other direction? Chest puffing, chin lifting, space claimed more aggressively? Does the person become more expressive or suddenly emotionally flat? Each pattern tells a story. None of them tells the whole story. but each is a thread, and threads, woven together with patience and context, eventually form a picture. Self-knowledge. The mirror turned inward. We have returned to this theme at several points throughout this book, and we return to it one final time now because it is, in our view, the most important application of everything you have learned. Reading people is not only about reading others. At its deepest level, it is a practice of self-knowledge. Because here is what happens when you become genuinely attentive to the behavioral signals of the people around you. You start noticing your own behavioral signals with equal clarity. You notice the moment in a difficult conversation when your breathing changes. You notice the tightening in your chest that precedes the defensive response you are about to give, the one that sounds reasonable on the surface but is actually protecting you from something you don't want to examine. You notice the way your voice loses warmth with certain people or gains it with others, in ways that tell you something real about how you actually feel rather than how you think you should feel. This self-observation is extraordinarily valuable, not because it gives you the ability to perform yourself better, to project more confidence, to appear more emotionally stable, to manage your impression with greater skill. These are side effects at best, not the point. The point is that the same signals your body sends to others, it also sends to you, if you are listening. The nervous sweat before a presentation is telling you that you care about this audience. The flat, closed feeling in your body when someone in your life makes a request is telling you something about the relationship that your social conditioning may be preventing you from saying out loud. The involuntary warmth you feel in a conversation with a particular person is telling you that this person matters to you in a way you may not have consciously acknowledged. The body knows. It has always known. The skill we are developing in this book, the skill of reading signals, can be turned inward to give us access to our own truth as well as others. The ethics of deep observation. We have touched on this at intervals throughout the book. Now, as we approach the close, it deserves a direct and serious examination. The skills described in these pages are genuinely powerful. A person who can consistently and accurately read faces, posture, eye behavior, voice, and behavioral patterns has access to information about the people around them that those people may not consciously intend to share. This creates an asymmetry, and asymmetries of information can be abused. The history of human manipulation, in politics, in sales, in intimate relationships, is in many ways the history of people using their superior knowledge of human behavioral signals to exploit others' vulnerabilities. This is real. It happens. And learning to read people skillfully does nothing by itself to prevent you from using what you learn in harmful ways. The only protection against this is intention. Specifically, the consistent, examined, deliberately maintained intention to use this knowledge for connection rather than control, for understanding rather than exploitation, for the service of the relationship rather than the service of your own agenda. This intention must be actively maintained, not assumed. It is easy to tell yourself that your curiosity about other people's emotional states is purely empathic. It is harder to notice the moments when what you are actually doing is cataloging vulnerabilities, seeking leverage, or satisfying the particular kind of ego. Satisfaction that comes from knowing more about someone than they realize you know. The ethical observer, the one whose reading of people makes the world a little better rather than a little more exploited, is someone who holds these questions consciously. Why am I looking at this person with this level of attention? What am I going to do with what I see? Does this person have a relationship with me that makes this level of attention appropriate? Or am I looking at someone who has not consented to being studied? Is my reading of this person in service of them, of their needs, their dignity, their experience of being understood, or in service of something I want from them? These are not rhetorical questions. They are genuine calibration tools, and they require honest answers. What mastery looks like. Let us end with a picture of what the fully developed practice of reading people looks and feels like, not as an idealized abstraction, but as a realistic description of what becomes available to you through sustained, ethical, empathic application of these skills. You walk into a room full of strangers, a conference in Mumbai, a dinner party in Montreal, a community meeting in Nairobi, and within the first few minutes, you have a working map of the social dynamics. You know roughly who is comfortable and who is not. You know who the dominant voices are and who is waiting for permission to speak. You know who is genuinely interested in the stated purpose of the gathering and who is managing their own agenda. You have identified the person in the room who is carrying something difficult today. The slightly collapsed posture, the frequent gaze drops, the too quick smile. You are not omniscient. You are not infallible. Your read on individuals will be incomplete, sometimes wrong, always provisional. You know this, and you hold your assessments lightly, ready to update as more information arrives. But you are also no longer blind in the way most people are blind. You are receiving the full signal, not just the words, not just the performance, but the whole, continuous, honest broadcast that human beings produce simply by being alive in a room together. You use this signal not to gain advantage, but to connect more deeply. You approach the person whose posture suggests difficulty not with the smug satisfaction of having detected something hidden, but with the simple human generosity of making more space for them. You adjust your communication style in real time based on what you are reading, speaking more gently to the person who is clearly overwhelmed, more directly to the person who needs precision, more warmly to the person who is lonely in a crowded room. You make people feel, without being able to say exactly how, that you truly see them. And being truly seen, not managed, not performed at, not impressed with your credentials or your strategy, is one of the deepest needs a human being has. This is the highest application of everything in this book, not the detection of deception, not the strategic advantage in negotiation, not the ability to identify personality types at a glance. All of these have their place. But the crown is this: the capacity to give another person the rare, irreplaceable experience of being in the presence of someone who actually knows they are there. A final practice. As you close this book and return to the ordinary flow of your days, we offer one practice above all others. It is simple. It costs nothing, and it will, if you maintain it, change everything. In every significant conversation you have from this point forward, make a choice. Rather than thinking about what you are going to say next, spend a portion of your attention simply receiving the person in front of you. Watch their face, notice their body. Listen not just to the words, but to the voice beneath the words. Let the whole signal reach you. You do not need to analyze it in real time. You do not need to generate conclusions. Simply receive. Be present to the full human being in front of you, their emotional state, their energy, their history written in their posture, their truth flickering across their face in fractions of a second. The analysis will come naturally. The understanding will emerge on its own. What you are practicing, in the first instance, is simply presence, the willingness to be fully here, fully attentive, fully open to what is actually happening in the space between you. Presence is the foundation of everything. Every gesture you learn to read, every micro-expression you learn to recognize, every postural signal you learn to interpret, all of it serves only one purpose: to make you more present to the extraordinary, complex, endlessly surprising human being who is standing in front of you. Read people not to understand them as objects. Read them to encounter them as subjects. Full, sovereign, mysterious, worth every ounce of your attention. Because in the end, this is what we all want, and what so few of us receive. To be in the presence of someone who is really, truly, genuinely paying attention. You now know how to be that person.